So our next step is to work with the opposite, where they're going to go ahead and they're going to give us the decimal, and they want us to write out the fraction. So we're going to read the numbers behind the decimal and their place value. Now I know some kids struggle with reading place value. Okay, when you work with decimal numbers, you've got your decimal, and then this first place behind it is called the tenths. Then you have the hundredths, the thousandths, the 10,000ths, and so forth. Okay, and some kids, that throws them off right away, and they say, I'm not going to be successful at this because I can't memorize all of those. Okay, so I'm going to teach you a technique today that you can use even if you don't have all of these place values memorized. Some of you do, and that's awesome. You can go ahead and use that skill. But some of you don't, and so I don't want that to be what deters you from being successful at this concept. Okay, so the first step we're going to do is when I look at this negative 0.26, which I would read that as 26 hundredths. And those of you that can read this decimal number, well, you're really saying the fraction anyway. Okay, but let's say you weren't good, and you weren't good at reading it with its place value, and all you could say is that's negative 0.26. You're going to take this number that's behind the decimal, and you're going to write it as the top number. Okay, then we're going to put our fraction bar. And then here's the trick. I'm going to count how many numbers are behind that decimal. There are 2. Take note, there are 2 zeros behind my 1 on the bottom number. So I end up with negative 26 over 100, which now, that's my first step. Now I'm going to look at this and see if I can reduce that down. And I'm noticing that these are both even numbers, which means 2 would go in both of them. So 26 divided by 2 would give me 13. And 100 divided by 2 would give me 50. That's how we ended up at the negative 13/50ths. Okay, so we're going to practice some of these skills. Okay, so here's our first one. We have negative 0.7. Now some kids can read that, and they can read it with the place value. Let's pretend like I wasn't good at that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my negative sign out in front because I know that has to be part of my answer. I'm going to take this number, and it's going to become my top number. So it becomes a 7 as my top number. And then to figure out the bottom number, well, there was only one number behind the decimal. So I'm going to have a 1 followed by 1, 0. Okay, this will always be a 1 on the bottom until we have to reduce. Sometimes then it changes. So this is my final answer, negative 7/10. And the nice thing about this is most kids are good at reading a fraction, but not good at reading a decimal. So if they were to then ask us the next step of, could you write this out in words? Well, you could probably say negative 7/10 and write that out in words, versus up here, maybe a student couldn't do that. Okay, so let's try another one. Okay, this next one, we're going to have a number in front of our decimal. Okay, so I have negative 10.25. Okay, and when I read that, this is negative 10. This right here means and 25, and then I have to figure out the place value. Maybe I'm not great at that. Okay, so I'm going to take what's sitting in front, and that's just going to be that big in size number that sits out in the front of my fraction. So there's my negative 10. Okay, this is going to be my top number, so 25 is the top. Over, there's 1, 2 numbers, so I'm going to have a 1 with 2 zeros. So I've got negative 10 and 25 hundredths. So if I was going to write it out in words, that's how I would write it out in words. But now I have to make this in lowest terms because they're going to ask us to simplify it. Okay, so I'm noticing here and here that 5 would go into both of those, but I'm noticing a bigger number, and that would be 25. So I'm going to divide each of these by 25 in my head. And if you can't, then pull a calculator out. Final answer is negative 10. 25 divided by 25 is going to give me 1. 100 divided by 25 is going to give me 4. So I just found out that my final answer is negative 10 and 1/4. Okay? At least for now, start with this process. You know, if it's the reduction that's slowing you down, we'll work on that. We'll work on that skill. But for right now, I want you practicing converting it into a fraction. And then if we have to work on the reduction, we'll do that as we're learning it. Okay, so practice the process of changing it into a fraction first. Okay, so I'm going to pull these 2 out. And that first one, you're going to have to reduce down. Okay, so go ahead, pause your video, and work through these two, and then check back when you're finished. So we'll write them on your whiteboard or on your sheet of paper. So go ahead and pause the video and do that now. So you should have gotten 125 thousandths, which reduces to 1/8 for the first one. And the second one is -3 and 1/10. Okay, so the last concept that we're going to be